All I needed was a ride. Just a quick lift, 5 minutes out of his way. Nothing big, nothing complicated. But with Coach Whitmore, even the smallest favor came with a price. He wasn't the kind of man who did anything for free. Not really. I can still remember the way the leather seat stuck to the backs of my legs as I climbed out of his truck. The engine ticking as it cooled, the air heavy between us. And then, just before I closed the door, he leaned in and whispered something I've never been able to forget. Even now, every time I see him standing on the sidelines at practice, arms crossed, eyes scanning the field like he owns it, I hear those words all over again, like they're stitched into the inside of my skull. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us but also contributes to spreading value to the community. My name's Camille. I'm 43 years old. And before anything else, before I was a mother, before I ever figured out who I wanted to be, I was a wife. 19 years and counting, tied to a man who spends more time talking to clients than he does talking to me. Lately, it feels like he only calls home to check boxes, not because he wants to hear my voice. At night, we pass each other in the hallway like strangers in a hotel. We live in a suburb that prides itself on stability, on appearances. One of those cul-de-sacs that curves gently into the illusion of peace and permanence. Perfect lawns edged just so, mailboxes that never lean, morning joggers who wave but don't stop. Out here, everyone smiles a little too long and talks just loud enough to cover up what they're trying not to say. No one asks why your porch light stays off 3 nights in a row. They just notice and then pretend they didn't. Our son Elijah is 15. Tall for his age, quick on his feet. Football's been his world since he was 8 years old, and he's only gotten better. When he's out on that field, you can tell he was meant for it, meant for more than this place. And the coaches, they've noticed, they're paying attention, especially Coach Whitmore, and that should feel like a good thing. But after that ride, I'm not so sure anymore. That's when Coach Whitmore entered the picture. 4 months, I had been the one behind the wheel, shuttling Elijah to his football practices every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. It was part of the routine, like the morning sun rising without fail, something I could depend on. But then, just when I thought we'd gotten a handle on things, the second car, the one we'd been holding together with duct tape and prayer, finally gave up on us for good. The engine sputtered and coughed its last breath, and that was that. My husband promised we'd replace it soon. I've learned to take that word with a grain of salt, though. Soon turned into weeks, and then months. 7 months to be exact. 7 months of waiting for something that was never really on its way. So, there I was, staring at the reality of having no car and a son who still needed rides. That's when I started doing what I had to do. Asking for help. Small favors at first. A lift here, a ride there. It felt uncomfortable, asking for those little humiliations, but what choice did I have? And when it came down to it, who was I kidding? If I wanted Elijah to make it to practice, someone had to help. That's when I finally texted Coach Whitmore. The message felt clumsy as I typed it out, but in the end, I told myself it wasn't any different from asking a neighbor. Just another way to get by. But it was different. I knew it as soon as he replied. It wasn't like asking a neighbor. Not at all. Coach Whitmore was 48, maybe 49. In his prime, but showing the signs of years spent in the trenches. Tall, taller than I remembered. And with that look about him, that worn, rugged edge that spoke of long hours spent outdoors, pushing through exhaustion. He had the kind of face that could have belonged to someone who spent all day in the sun, moving heavy things, working the land. He didn't have the easy smile that came naturally to some people. No, Coach Whitmore's smile was slow, deliberate, like he already knew what you were thinking before you even said it. It was a smile that didn't reassure. It unsettled. Like he had you pegged in a way that made you wonder if he was seeing things you weren't ready to face yet. And when I climbed into his truck that night after practice, the space between us felt bigger than just the cab of his vehicle. The quiet stretched on longer than I expected, the hum of the engine filling the gaps as I wondered what had led me to this place, this situation. Every time he spoke, every time his eyes flicked over to me, It was like he could read something in me that I wasn't ready to admit. The first time I really noticed him wasn't in any grand or memorable way, but looking back, I know it was the moment everything shifted. It was during a scrimmage last year. I was sitting alone in the bleachers, as usual. My husband wasn't there. He rarely is. A quick text, some excuse about a work call or a late meeting, but the truth is, I stopped expecting him to show up a long time ago. It's easier that way, I've learned. I was watching Elijah, focused on him more than I'd care to admit. Then the sound of Coach Whitmore's voice cut through the noise. He'd just finished barking orders at the boys. His usual post-scrimmage tirade. And as he walked past the stands, wiping the sweat from his neck with the edge of his shirt, his gaze briefly flicked down to me. It wasn't the look of a coach seeing a parent in the crowd. It was different. More subtle but unmistakable. It was a man noticing a woman, with that quiet awareness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't flinch. In fact, I caught myself smiling. I'm sure it lasted a moment too long. Maybe it was my way of pretending I wasn't affected. But I didn't look away, and neither did he. He nodded at me, just a small, barely there motion, and kept walking. No words, no acknowledgement beyond that brief glance and the nod. But that was enough. After that, I couldn't stop noticing him. It wasn't anything overt, nothing loud or obvious, but there was something about the way he'd find me in the crowd. During water breaks, when the boys were lined up to catch their breath, his eyes would linger for just a second longer than they should. During practice pickups, as I stood off to the side pretending to be busy with my phone, I'd catch him looking from across the lot. His gaze a little too intense, a little too knowing. It was subtle, and maybe, at first, I told myself it didn't mean anything. After all, I was just another parent, another face in the crowd. But I knew better. You don't notice someone that often by accident. You don't feel a shift in the air when they walk into the room unless something's changed, even if it's just the two of you who can feel it. The small moments started to add up. When the other parents would chatter and laugh after practice, I'd catch myself watching him more than I should. Every time I looked up, there he was. He never said much to me, never crossed that line. But I could tell he knew. He knew I was aware of him. And somewhere deep down, I knew I was aware of him too. He didn't say much, but there was an undeniable tension in the air, like something unspoken hung there, an unvoiced challenge, daring me to acknowledge it. The night I asked him for that ride, the sky had already started to weep. A light drizzle turned into steady, insistent rain by the time I finally managed to get Elijah to the field. By then, my hair was a tangled mess of frizz, the humidity making every strand feel like it was rebelling against my attempts to keep it neat. Coach Whitmore was standing by his truck, his usual stance of quiet authority amplified by the downpour. He had a clipboard clutched in one hand. His other arm braced against the rain as it came down in heavy sheets. The lights from the field flickered and buzzed around us, casting odd glows over everything, but he didn't seem to mind the storm at all. I approached him, clutching my umbrella as if it could shield me from more than just the rain, and called out, "Hey coach, any chance you could drop me home after practice? It's just a few blocks over." My voice felt small against the roar of the rain, but I wasn't sure why I'd hesitated. Maybe I just didn't expect him to agree so easily. He studied me for what felt like forever, his gaze intense and unreadable, before giving a small nod. "Sure. Long as you don't mind the conditions," he replied, his voice deep and measured. I laughed, thinking he was just making light of the downpour, joking in his usual gruff way, but when I looked up, I realized he wasn't smiling. Not even close. His eyes were unreadable, and there was something about his stance that felt different now, like he was saying more than just those words. "I don't give anything without strings," he added, his tone low and almost casual, before turning on his heel and walking off to yell at the boys, his voice cutting through the rain with sharp authority. I shrugged it off. I told myself it was just his dry sense of humor. Nothing more to it. But when the rain picked up, the final whistle blew, and the lights on the field flickered off, leaving the place shrouded in damp shadows, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that settled in my chest. As I climbed into his truck, the cold from the rain still clinging to me, the atmosphere shifted. The engine hummed softly, but there was something thick and taut between us now, something unsaid. The kind of tension that you couldn't put your finger on, but could feel with every breath you took. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was really prepared for what came next. The cab smelled like sawdust and cologne. His jacket was tossed in the back. A packet of sunflower seeds sat between us and the console. We rode in silence at first, just the sound of wipers dragging across glass. Then he asked, "What's your husband do again?" Pause. "Financial planner." He nodded like that confirmed something. "Busy guy, I bet." "Very." He didn't press, but the way he said it, like he already knew the whole story. Like he'd seen the way I sat alone at games, the way my shoulders folded inward when I thought no one was watching. When we hit a red light, he looked over at me. "You don't strike me as someone who's used to being ignored," he said quietly. I looked away. My throat tightened. We pulled up outside my house, and he didn't turn the truck off. I reached for the handle but stopped when I heard him say, "You ever think about wanting more?" My hand froze. "More what?" I asked, not turning. He didn't answer. Just said, "Same time next week." I nodded slowly and stepped out. As I closed the door, he leaned over the seat and said, "Just remember, rides aren't free." The next week he picked me up again. This time the truck was cleaner, warmer, like he'd thought about it. We didn't talk much, just small things, the weather, the game. He asked if Elijah ever talked about quitting. I said, "No, he loves it." "You raised a fighter," he said. "Wonder where he gets it from." We pulled up to my place again, but I didn't get out this time. We sat there for a moment in the dark. "You ever think about just driving?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "Not going in. Just keep going. 5 hours. In. Somewhere nobody knows your name." His eyes were on me, heavy, unmoving. And in that moment I felt it. That pull, that hunger I'd buried under years of grocery lists and bills and routine. I should have left, should have thanked him and stepped out. But instead I said, "If I did, what would the conditions be?" He leaned closer, close enough that I could feel the heat from his breath. And then the porch light flicked on. I jumped like I'd been burned. My husband stood on the steps, phone in hand, staring. Coach Whitmore didn't flinch. He leaned back in his seat and said, "Guess you'll find out next week." I stepped out, legs trembling, and as I walked up the drive, I knew something had shifted. I hadn't crossed the line, but my foot was already on the edge. The next morning my husband didn't say a word. He poured his coffee like he always did. 3 scoops, 1 sugar, no cream, then sat at the table across from me without lifting his eyes. I waited for something. Question, a cold remark, even a sarcastic jab. But there was nothing. Just the clink of his spoon and the occasional turn of a newspaper page. I'd barely slept. The air in our bedroom had felt different, thick and suspicious. He hadn't touched me as he climbed into bed last night. He always places his phone on the nightstand. Last night he kept it with him. I could still feel the imprint of Coach Whitmore's stare on me. His words still circling like a storm. "Guess you'll find out next week." But I didn't know what that meant anymore because now I wasn't sure who was playing who. I told myself I'd cancel the ride. I even typed the text, but I deleted it before sending because part of me wanted to see what the conditions were. It wasn't about desire, not fully. It was about being noticed. Being seen as someone who could still make a man pause. And Whitmore. He saw me like I hadn't been seen in years. Not as Elijah's mom. Not as his wife. But as Camille. When he picked me up that Thursday, the air was hotter than usual. The windows were halfway down. He didn't say anything at first, just drove. But then, just past the light on Redwood Avenue, he pulled over. "Come on," he said, unbuckling. "Come where?" He nodded toward a narrow path between 2 industrial buildings. There was a bench under a dead tree, barely visible from the road. We sat there in the silence, cars whooshing faintly in the distance. He didn't touch me, but his presence, God, it wrapped around me like static. I told him things I hadn't said out loud in years. How my husband hadn't looked me in the eye since 2019. How I used to write poetry and stopped after Elijah was born. How I sometimes stood in front of the bathroom mirror and couldn't recognize the woman staring back. He listened. Really listened. And when I finally stopped talking, he didn't offer cliches. He didn't say, "You deserve better." He just said, "I'd give you different." And that broke something open. Not love, not lust, but possibility. The next time we rode together, I didn't ask where we were going. We just drove. No destination. No clock. And nothing happened. Not in the way you'd think. But I held his wrist a little longer when he passed me a bottle of water. He brushed a leaf from my shoulder and his hand lingered. And when our fingers touched, we didn't pull away. We crossed a line we couldn't uncross. But it wasn't physical. It was deeper. More dangerous. The night it all came crashing down started like any other. Elijah had a late practice. I stayed until the end, and Whitmore offered me a ride. This time, when we pulled up in front of my house, something was off. The front door was wide open. No lights flickered from the inside. No sound of movement, just that eerie stillness hanging in the air. It felt like the quiet before a storm, and the unease settled in my stomach like a heavy stone. Coach Whitmore didn't even slow the truck. He kept his eyes forward, the engine humming steadily, almost as if he didn't notice the door standing ajar. But I did. Every instinct I had told me something was wrong, and the weight of it pressed on me as I slowly opened the door to step out. I moved slowly, like I was stepping into the unknown, the air damp against my skin, the silence of the house wrapping around me. My legs felt heavy as I made my way to the front steps, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was coming, something I wasn't prepared for. But what? Inside, the living room lights were on. Too bright. Too inviting, like they were trying to lure me into something I couldn't yet understand. My eyes darted to the coffee table. 3 things were arranged there, deliberately, like pieces of evidence laid out for me to find. My phone. A folded-up hoodie that looked disturbingly familiar. Whitmore's hoodie, the one he always wore when he coached. And an envelope. I walked in, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the carpet, and I stood there for a long moment, staring at those items. I didn't have to open the envelope to feel the weight of what it contained. He knew. When I finally opened it, my breath hitched in my throat. Photos. Printouts. Screenshots. The first was a picture of me. My face blurry but unmistakable, sitting in the passenger seat of Whitmore's truck. Another one zoomed in on me sitting on that old bench under the dead tree by the park. The images weren't just random shots. They were cropped and zoomed like someone had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment. And then I heard it, the soft, measured sound of footsteps coming from the kitchen. I turned to face him, my husband, standing in the doorway. His arms crossed over his chest. His expression was unreadable. His eyes locked on mine with a steady calmness that sent a shiver down my spine. "I didn't need to follow you," he said, his voice steady, almost too calm. "You gave it all away in your eyes." I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself, to explain everything that had happened. But before I could, he raised a hand, stopping me. It wasn't anger in his eyes, but something far worse, something colder. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, handing it to me without a word. The screen lit up, showing a video queued up and ready to play. My heart skipped as I saw my own face, blurry but undeniably mine, sitting in the passenger seat of Whitmore's truck. I was there, right where I'd been, but the look in my eyes. It wasn't the same. The video was shaky, the camera angle not quite right, but it was me. "I thought about confronting you weeks ago," he continued, his voice even, devoid of the storm I had expected. "But I decided to wait. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know if I could even speak." My eyes flickered between the video and my husband's calm demeanor. The words I had prepared all vanished in an instant. My mind raced, but nothing made sense. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time I realized something that twisted inside me like a knot. He wasn't hurt. Not in the way I expected. There was no fury, no anger, no heartbreak. He was calm. Calm. And in that moment, a new, far more chilling realization hit me. He wasn't just disappointed. He had been planning this, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to make a mistake. And I had. I slept with someone, he said, his voice like ice cutting through the air. The words hit me with the force of a blow I wasn't prepared for. My chest tightened, my throat went dry, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My heart dropped, literally felt like it was sinking, crashing to the floor somewhere far below me. I stared at him, disbelief clouding my thoughts, my mouth working but unable to form words. Who? I finally managed, the question slipping out like a whisper, a desperate plea for clarity. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his face cold, unreadable. His eyes weren't the ones I recognized anymore. Then, without saying another word, he turned and walked toward the hallway. His footsteps were too deliberate, too final. He reached Elijah's bedroom door and knocked, a soft, measured knock that felt like it was echoing in my skull, every second dragging my mind further into confusion. "It's time," he said. His voice quiet but laced with something sharp, like a hidden edge he was trying to conceal. The door opened and there she was. Nicole, Elijah's tutor. 28, blonde. Polite. The same woman I had welcomed into our home, fed meals to, trusted with my son's education. She stepped into the hallway, her face completely neutral, her purse strap tugged over her shoulder in a smooth, practiced motion. She didn't look at me, not even for a second. Not a trace of remorse, guilt, or anything resembling shame crossed her features. She just glanced away, eyes averted as if she had already settled on her place in this unspoken moment. Froze. My whole body seemed to stop working, like time itself had stalled around me, and all I could do was watch as they moved past me. My husband and Nicole, walking out of my life without so much as a second glance. He turned back to face me, his expression as calm as ever. "You wanted someone who saw you," he said, his words like daggers disguised as insight. "So did I." The finality in his tone sent a chill down my spine, and before I could react, he turned again and walked out, Nicole at his side. There was no yelling, no raised voices, no accusations or desperate pleas. Just silence. It was worse than any argument. This quiet devastation, this unbearable stillness, left nothing for me to hold on to. They simply left. The weight of it crushed me in a way no fight ever could. And I was left standing there, motionless, in the aftermath of everything that had just unraveled before me. 3 weeks have passed since that night. Feels like a lifetime ago, and yet like it happened just yesterday. Elijah still goes to practice, though the drive there no longer feels like it did before. The air between us, the space that used to be filled with normalcy, now feels like a void. And Coach Whitmore. He still watches me, his eyes following me when I drive away alone. I feel his gaze like a heavy weight pressing down on me, watching me with a look that seems to strip me bare, but I never stop. I don't take rides anymore. The thought of it makes my skin crawl. I walk instead, sometimes in the rain, sometimes in the heat, always alone. The walk feels endless, but at least it's mine. 'Cause I learned something. Something crucial, something I can't forget, no matter how much I want to. Conditions are never about the ride. They're about the cost. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.